conservative, constitutional. It's the Andrew Cooperrider Show, keeping you informed on what's going on right here in Kentucky.
And welcome everybody to another wonderful week right here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Been off for the last week, glad to be back. And I thought we would come back doing our monthly tradition of looking at the Contract Review Committee, government expenditures. What did our state legislature approve, disapprove? What did they say okay to our state government spending money on this week? Now, obviously, this is an interesting and normally fraught topic because I'll talk about this on here. I'll make some posts about what they're spending money on. And of course, the statutory committee, Government Contract Review Committee, will come back and complain about what I'm doing because they're Republicans. And so we expect Democrats to do a lot of these things I'm going to talk about, but we do not expect Republicans to give them the big old thumbs up. But yet that's exactly what we're seeing. So we're going to dig into those contracts today. I will, first though, start off by giving them a little bit of a defense. But before I dig down into it, let's make sure you have liked this video if you're watching it on social media or YouTube. Let's make sure you comment if you enjoy what's going on and you respond as the video goes on with questions, concerns, thoughts. And let's make sure you've hit that subscribe button, signed up for notifications too as well. Because here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show, we're the state's only show that comes out more than once a week that's focusing specifically on Kentucky issues. There's a few podcasts out there that may focus on some local issues too as well. And I do suggest you follow this hyper-local. There's a few podcasts out there that do some state, some national, but we focus a lot here on statewide, state-level issues, things everybody should care about. Now, if you want to reach out to the show, feel free to email info@theandrewshow.com. Once again, that's info@theandrewshow.com. You can also head over to theandrewshow.com and hit the contact tab, reach out to the show. You can also, may I remind you all to please make sure that if you're listening to this on the radio or watching this on TV, head over to theandrewshow.com, hit the Listen Now tab, see all the places where you can listen to the podcast that comes out more than just once a week. But without further ado, let's dig down into it. So as I stated at the top, we'll be digging into these contracts that have floated through the Contract Review Committee here this last month. And anytime this happens, about once a month when I look at these and I post about them and I say what's going on, as I said at the top, the Contract Review Committee members get a little testy. And I want to make sure you know who they are. I do talk about this committee often. So I do think it's worthwhile for you all to know who they are. And that is Senator Stephen Meredith is the co-chair. Mark Hart out of the House. He's the other co-chair. Gary Boswell out of the Senate. Donald Douglas out of the Senate. Reginald Thomas out of the Senate. Beverly Chester Burton out of the House. Bobby McCool out of the House. And Michael Sarge Pollock out of the House. Those are the members of it. I do want to pause here real quick. It's funny that Chester Burton is on the committee only because I'm not bringing this up as to wasteful expenditures, but there were some expenditures this month approved going to Mothers Against Drunk Driving. And despite what you think about the organization or anything else, like I said, I didn't pull out their expenditures to go over. Frankly, if we get to the point where the money we're giving to Mothers Against Drunk Drivers to combat drunk driving and whether or not it's effective or not, when that becomes worthwhile discussion for us, we'll be in a much better place as a state as far as spending goes. But it is funny to see Chester Burton on the committee having to approve those expenditures when, as we all know, Chester Burton has been arrested for the second time for an alleged DUI just a few weeks ago. Second arrest for an alleged DUI. So there you go. That's interesting that she has to give Mothers Against Drunk Driving signing off on what they're getting. Maybe she could benefit from some of their programs, perhaps, if what's been alleged is true, though, like I said, the stories are pretty interesting. But anyways, putting that to the side, so every time I go through this, especially the Republicans on the committee, they get flack from people because they're being called out. Why are you allowing this to go through? And we've seen a few different arguments from them. Now, one of the arguments that used to go on, that we used to hear a lot from them about why they allow this to go through, is because they can't do anything on the committee, which is partially true. When the legislative session is out, remember the first few months of the year, is when we have a legislative session. Then otherwise, our legislators are out of session. And outside of that time, they can't actually do much to stop the governor from doing anything. They can't stop them from spending money if in a certain way, as long as it's been appropriated. And keep in mind, the way the appropriations work, the way budgeting works, is that they give large pots of money to the governor for his various departments. So they'll say, the Cabinet for Health and Family Services gets $300 million, Economic Development gets $300 million, or whatever the numbers may be. And then it's up to the administration to decide how they want to go ahead and spend that money. However, every time they do spend money into a contract or personnel contract, that contract goes through this contract review committee for them to be able to hold hearings on. They can call people up to testify on those contracts. And then beyond that, though, if they do deny the contract, it then goes over to the finance cabinet for them to override the veto. And of course, the finance cabinet is a part of the Beshear administration, so it gets overrode, and then they can't really do anything about it. Now, there is some cases in court right now going on where the legislature tried to remove the veto power of these contracts from the governor to the treasurer, but for now, it gets overrode by the governor. And so the claim is, well, we can't do much about it, so, we don't bother to do anything. But frankly, I've went over in this show quite a bit over the last years. I've talked about these meetings. That doesn't hold water, because what they can do is set these contracts aside and tell people, look, we're going to overcome this contract. We're going to set it to the side. And then when it comes time that they do come back into session, they take every single contract that they've disapproved, they put it into a bill to say that you can no longer do this contract, we're terminating this contract, and then the contract ends. And if they did that, it would certainly hold back and stop the executive branch, even when they're out of session, from spending willy-nilly like crazy. Now, as I made that argument that, well, you could go ahead, though, and set aside all those contracts and then put them into a one bill for you to deny, as I made that argument time and time again, and as that argument's come out publicly, they've stopped claiming that. And now what we're hearing is that this last time around when people brought forward these is that, well, we don't have the time to go through. We don't have the time to look through these quite the same way everybody else does. Guys, I'm going to tell you, these that I'm bringing forward to you, these that I'm going to bring up, I literally, I'm not kidding you, sat down, pulled up the contracts on the list for these few months, and I spent maybe an hour to 2 hours researching these contracts. So these issues I'm bringing forward to you that I noticed, I discovered in 2 hours of research. So it's hard to claim that somehow that would be more difficult for a legislator to do when I'm not even being paid by the taxpayer to fulfill work on these committees, and I'm able to do it in my spare time. As you guys know, I have a life outside of doing this podcast. I have companies, I have employees, I have businesses that need to be run. But yet I find the time, it's hard for me to believe that a legislator being paid 50, 60, 70K a year, in some instances, I believe President Cyrus, for example, being paid significantly more than that according to the LRC listings on salaries. But I find it hard to believe that these legislators can't find a few hours a month to dedicate to fulfilling the work on the committee. And so at the end of the day, that's the God's honest truth. Now, granted, what I would hope they would do is start to learn what we're noticing in these contracts, what I point out, what you all then react to and say something to them about, because I think it's incredibly important that we go ahead and start to actually stop these things. That's the hope. That's the whole reason why I cover these contracts. What can we do to stop this? And to start us off, I will be talking about a contract where we're handing out to an organization that is pushing DEI principles. That'll be our first contract we're going to go ahead and cover. So we'll go over exactly what that contract is. After this short break, you're listening to the Andrew Cooperrider Show, your source for Kentucky politics. And you are back here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Before the break, as I said, I'll be digging through some of our approved expenditures, some of the contracts that were floated before the Contract Review Committee here in Kentucky. It's a legislative contract review committee, and going over some of the issues that I see with what we're spending money on. And I talked about in the last section how this committee functions, what its powers are, what they aren't. But I think it's incredibly important as well that I cover these things, not just because we wish that they do something about it, But every time that we hear individuals talking about how government needs more money, even at the state level, they say, look, we can't print money. We need more money. We need to tax you more. We need these items done. We need to increase revenues. You can turn around and say, look, we're already wasting money in all these other places. Sure, maybe your local government needs money, but perhaps the state could ease off if they could tighten their belt. And that would give more opportunity for the local governments to raise their own revenues in order to go ahead and take care of their citizens, if that is the issue. I know that goes on in some counties, but in other counties, local governments are doing fine. The state's making a buck. The federal government's making a buck. You're nothing but a slave to the taxpayer system. Well, let's go over what they're spending your money on, shall we? So first off, what I want to point out is a grant match for the Partners for Rural Impact Incorporated. So they're giving $1 million in order to give matching funds to a federal grant that's also apparently, I think, right around $1 million, maybe a bit more. So at least $1 million, $2 million is being spent here, but this is the state side of things. They're paying out $1 million, and this is specifically too out of the Budget Reserve Trust Fund. And I have issues when I see money coming out of the Budget Reserve Trust Fund, which is like our savings account for this, and this is defined as it's to help the Partners for Rural Impact provide matching funds for salaries, fringe benefits, travel expenses for staff, office supplies, printing event expenses, including venue rental, materials, and honorariums for speakers. So, of course, paying speaking fees, hosting events, and paying their staff salaries. But this is just normal operation, but yet it's coming out of our savings account. And that is something that even our Republican legislators have recognized that they shouldn't be doing. They should not be expending money out of essentially what is the state savings account, the Budget Reserve Trust Fund, the rainy day fund, on salaries. What they should be doing with it when it gets too high, when they have more than they need to set aside in order for emergency expenses, what it should be spent on is one-time items that can go ahead and lower expenses into the future, such as servicing debt, paying down our pension obligations, paying down our bond debt obligations, maybe spending money on capital outlays. So like, if you have a building that you're spending a lot of money on repairing, and if you had the upfront capital, building a building would cost less. Or, locally, this would be something like trucks and vehicles, where if you have a vehicle that you're spending money on repairing, but if you went ahead and purchased a vehicle for more now, for a capital upfront, more money, but overall you end up spending less, then it actually helps your budget later on down the road. That's what the fund should be used for when it gets above a certain amount. But instead, and even Republicans tend to recognize that, but here we have them using it for salaries and funds for the Partners for Rural Impact. Now maybe you think this is an important group, but outside of where the money is coming from, let's talk about what this group does exactly. Or more importantly, what it's pushing in. To give you some idea of what we can expect to see it pushing, we need but look at who runs the place, who's on the board. For an example, the president and founding partner, president, CEO of Partners for Rural Impact is a Dreama Gentry, whose accolades include a Annie E. Casey Children and Family Fellow, and a Pritchard Committee Equity Coalition member, among other honors. Now, maybe you're saying, look, that's just one person who has equity in their list of accomplishments. Surely it's not a DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion type group that pushes DEI principles, is it? Well, let's see who else is a part of this organization. Let's look at the board here. A member of the board for Partners for Rural Impact is Joshua Frazier Sparks, who's Director of Culture, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Walmart. We also have on our board of directors Danny Murphy, who's the board chair, Senior Assistant Dean of Community Engagement and Operations and Chief Diversity Officer at UK Rosenberg College of Law. So the place is being run by people whose sole focus is DEI. That's what they're supposed to focus on, these DEI initiatives. Now, they may sound nice, obviously. Every time we talk about DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, you'd think people would be clued in by now that this isn't necessarily a fantastic thing. It sounds nice, but what it mainly deals with, of course, is treating people differently based on their skin color, based on their gender, based on their nationality. DEI, by another term, is just racism, period, straightforward, simple. Call me crazy, but I think everybody should be treated equally and have the same opportunities regardless of their skin color or gender. On top of that, call me crazy, but I do think that it's communistic to demand everybody have the same outcome. It's not communistic to demand everybody have equal opportunities, but equity means you want everybody to come out the same. Everybody to be equal in the end is equity. Equitable outcomes, not equal outcomes. But, maybe you're just like, look, it's just got a few DEI members. Is the Partners for Rural Impact, is that really an organization pushing DEI? Well, when they post videos like tools to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion as a part of their rural library network, yeah, I would say their purpose is to push DEI concepts. And we have to take a good hard look at how are we using our tax dollars. This isn't about if people want to privately donate money to DEI groups to do DEI work. Okay, that's their freedom of speech, their freedom to do so. But we're talking about how they're spending our dollars, our money. We're not talking about how they're spending their money. They're talking about how we're spending our money. And a group, maybe they do great work at the Partners for Rural Impact. Maybe they really make an impact helping out a lot of individuals obtain their goals and having opportunities in Eastern Kentucky. And generally speaking, I'm supportive of that simply because it was the government who took away those opportunities. It's government that took away coal. It's government that took away tobacco. It's government that took away hemp. It's government that took away timber. It's government that takes away oil. It's government that takes away natural gas drilling. It's government that regulates those into non-existence and has left an area like Eastern Kentucky that is rich in natural resources to be poor and impoverished, despite all the wealth they have surrounding them in the hills and the trees. But regardless, we could do that with a group maybe that isn't simultaneously pushing their far leftist viewpoints. Something everybody could agree with. But maybe you think, well, maybe that expenditure's okay. What else do you have here? Well, here we go. Here's another one for you. This is the Department for Workforce Investment. Their Kentucky Workforce Advisory Board, they're giving $35,000 to host a retreat. They're giving that money to Goodwill Industries of Kentucky as to provide funds via the Curio Collection by Hilton, through which it receives discounts on hotel and meeting room rates, drinks and refreshments, audio-visual equipment, rental, etc. Obtain discounted rates on hotel and meeting rooms, drinks and refreshments, audio-visual equipment rental, and parking rates for the Kentucky Workforce Advisory Board's retreat on November 20th to 2024 at the Campbell House in Lexington. Now, what is the KY Workforce Advisory Board? Well, that is a board that helps the governor with workforce investments. It's a board that has groups all around the state that look at local areas and provide suggestions to the governor of what they should do in order to go ahead and work on workforce development. The reason why I point this out as a waste is that, well, the workforce development's out of Frankfort. Frankfort, where the government owns quite a lot of buildings, quite a lot of meeting areas. I mean, you've got the annex, the state capitol, you've got tons of rooms up there, caucus meeting rooms, rooms that hold hundreds of people. If you needed to have a meeting, a group meeting, you could hold it there. Frankfort is not that far from Lexington. Trust me, I live in Lexington. I can get to Frankfort about 20 to 30 minutes, depending on what part of town you're on. It doesn't take that long, maybe 35 on the high side. Not that much farther to drive. So you think if you do have to spend taxpayer funds, if for some reason a gathering, a networking event, what do they call this, a retreat needs to be hosted, wouldn't it be more cost effective to not have it at a hotel, but have it in Frankfort, in a building and room that the taxpayers already pay for? Then all you maybe need to pay for is catering if you have to have the hosting retreat, and maybe then hotel rooms for members who had to travel from outside the area they are traveling in because, they're a part of the board, but they are out in Western Kentucky or they're part of their working groups out in Western Kentucky that help operate and do everything. Or, our government entirely operated on Zoom meetings for quite some time. Maybe we don't need to spend $35,000 on a retreat anymore. Maybe that's not something we need to be doing. Just an idea. Well, coming up after this, we'll go over just how much money University of Louisville got set aside in their contracts in order to do search committee consulting, just in order to operate their hiring practices. This on top of course, the fact that they have an entire HR department, but apparently they also need, well, a lot more money in order to attract in people. Who knew the University of Louisville was just such an awful place? They need this kind of money to attract in employees. So we're going to have all that and more. We'll go over more of these contracts after this short break. You're listening to the Andrew Cooperrider Show. As always, if you want to reach out to the show, question, comments, concerns, think something's wrong, go ahead and email info@theandrewshow.com. Once again, that's info@theandrewshow.com. We'll be back in a few short minutes. And you're back here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. So we've been digging into some pretty crazy expenditures, pretty crazy projects, and now we're looking at University of Louisville and what they sent through the legislature this month. What they sent through the Government Contract Review Committee this month, what they went ahead and got signed off on to spend on specifically search committee consulting. So these contracts are described as simply this: provide funds to assist the hiring of committee in identifying potential candidates on an as-needed basis. Services include evaluating and recommending candidates for additional consideration, verifying resumes and employment salary history, contacting references, providing complete background investigations for the final candidates, and managing the overall search process in a manner consistent with the best practices and requirements of all applicable laws. Now, they put together these groups, not one, not two, but three groups with three different contracts for each group, for each hiring agency, and over 2 years. Let's see how much you think they're going to spend over 2 years using outside human resource searching. And before you guess at the number, let's go ahead and take a look at their HR department, shall we? Because, of course, what are we talking about here? Isn't there an HR department already there that's job would be to recruit and train and everything else? Well, you're right, there is. According to the University of Louisville's own website, at least with public-facing contact information. So this does include individuals that you would not need to reach out to for any particular reason. So there could be people obviously in the back end just working, but alone on their website with contact information in the HR department is about 26 employees. And of those employees, there is a department called Employment and Talent Managers with Director Stacy Gardner as the director. And then you have one, not two, but three people with the words recruiter in their job title. The words recruiter. So you got a director and then three individuals with the word recruiter in their job title. So you'd say, well, look, they already have three recruiters. How much more goes into it? Obviously, they are hiring a lot of people. So what should we do? Now, this is ongoing. Remember, this is just ongoing work. Well, they've set aside, they've asked for and got over $1.5 million. So they're giving $240,000 in one contract, $610,000 in another, and then $590,000 in another. So let's see, that is right at 1.5 million, 1.4, 1.5 million over 2 years, so around $750K a year. You could literally hire 2, 3, 4, 5 more recruiters for that same amount of money. 4 recruiters at least for the same amount of money. Wouldn't that be a cheaper, and well, actually, you'd spend less. You could hire 4 and spend less. Wouldn't that be a cheaper option for you? What do these people do? What do these supervisors do? And I bring this up and you could say, well, University of Louisville, that's its own group. So, that's really not something we necessarily need to worry about. But they are a state entity. They're funded by the state. The state gives them hundreds of millions of dollars a year. There's a reason why they have to get their contracts approved through the, state government contract review committee. Perhaps we should better spend that money if we have that much recruiting going on. Over 2 years, we need to spend $1.5 million on it. Perhaps we should hire somebody to do the job. Just a thought. Here's another one for you. Now, this is interesting, right? So a lot of times, you'll hear me talking about these obviously crazy contracts. We talked about a group that pushes DEI. We talked about spending, a lot of money on recruiters. We talked about spending money on, employee retreats that maybe aren't necessary. Those are all obvious things. And then you get into a place where it's less obvious, where people typically don't like to venture or bring up because it deals with, of course, construction expenses. And in this case, we're talking about specifically hospitals. Now, most people would agree, yeah, let's just give the hospitals whatever money they need. Let's just, if they need to build something or they need this, let's throw money at it. Or maybe a lot of people would think it's a good expenditure of taxpayer funds. And you'll also find this in construction work as well. When you start looking at the construction, at the road work, at the trails, at the parks, at those projects, you start to see some pretty inexplicable, really expensive things. Take for an example, here's an example here coming out of the Gallatin County Fiscal Court wants to provide funds for the construction of a 880 square foot pharmacy addition at the Triad Health Systems Clinic. So, of course, this is not an entity that's owned by the government. This is a separate entity on its own that they want to provide them with money to go ahead and build a pharmacy addition, 880 square feet. And so you may say, well, Andrew, I get it. It's not a government group, but we should go ahead, give them the money. It helps everybody. And, a lot of these hospitals don't make much of a profit. They just kind of operate. Well, I haven't gotten to the price yet. Because remember, this is an 880 square foot pharmacy. We are giving them, to build 880 square foot pharmacy, we're giving them $684,000. Y'all, that is a construction cost for an addition of $777.27 a square foot. This isn't a completely new construction. You don't got to run power lines to it. You don't got to you don't got to build driveways. This is an addition to an already existing building, an addition of 880 square feet. And we're going to spend more than $675K. We're going to spend $777 a square foot. Are you kidding me? Is the pharmacy going to be plated in gold? Do they manufacture the drugs at 880 square feet? That's like half of your average size. That's like a one-bedroom apartment is 880 square feet. And they're spending $777 on a per square foot on a pharmacy that big as an addition. Absolutely 100% insane. But that's not the only place where we have construction issues, but it's also not the only time where we give money and we call it out. For an example, in the prior month's contract review time, when I pointed out things we shouldn't be spending money on, one of the things I pointed out dealt with the Louisville Orchestra. And we talked about the fact that the Louisville Orchestra was given millions of dollars in order to put on productions around the state, reportedly, but it just says it's for just general producing of items, of classes, of workshops, of shows. And of course, one of those shows and classes and workshops that they do over at the Louisville Orchestra is teaching kids how to rap about social justice issues. I'm not kidding. That is something we really do fund here at the state. Here, hold on. This is a news story on that. I want to remind you how ridiculous it is. Here's a news story on that rap class. Here we go.
At 6, the summer camp is in full swing to get students ready to rap in the Louisville Orchestra. The program is called the Low Rap School. The summer workshop will connect students from 5th to 12th grade with local social justice educators and musicians to help them write their own raps. Now, at the end of the program, students will perform their lyrics on stage with the live orchestra. Organizers for the program says it gives kids the opportunity to express powerful messages about social justice and activism.
Real rap to me is an artist is talking about what they're going through and, really describing their life. They're not saying that their life is perfect, but they're saying that there are ups and downs, just because that's true.
The summer program will go until Friday of this week. If you're interested, it's not too late to sign up. You can find a link to register on our website, WLKY.com.
So obviously, great expenditure. Well, there's another place where we can look at a lot of things in times where we're giving out money and say, should we give them money? Not because we don't agree or disagree necessarily with what they're doing, but do they actually need it? Remember, times are tight. Belts are getting tightened. Maybe it's time we start asking some of these people that live off the taxpayer teat to do the same. We'll have that. We'll discuss that story after this short break. You're back here on this final segment of the Andrew Cooperrider Show. So we've been digging into wasteful spending, and I started digging into some of the places where we waste and it's not necessarily obvious, talking, of course, about that pharmacy at a hospital that we're spending $777 a square foot on. Here's another place where, I would make the argument that times are tight. Taxpayers are, of course, trying to tighten their belts, and yet the government's sucking like a leech off us more and more. And so that means we need government to cut back because we should be paying less in taxes. It's rough out there. And with that in mind, I would challenge our legislators who are approving these contracts to start to take a look at these nonprofits that they give money to and see what kind of financial position they're in. Before the break, I talked about the Louisville Orchestra nonprofit that was in the black several $1 million and had millions upon millions in the bank, but yet we gave them $4 million in order to continue operations and put on more productions of things like Wicked and rap classes about social justice warriors. Well, here's another example, and this comes out of Glasgow, Kentucky, where we're giving $2 million to the T.J. Sampson Community Hospital. Now, this is a nonprofit hospital, but we're giving them $2 million to provide funds for the construction of a third-floor pavilion. It's in a rural area, Glasgow, Kentucky. Maybe it's not the most profitable place to operate a hospital. Maybe the hospital doesn't have the money, but they need the facilities to meet the healthcare needs of the people in the area, and the $2 million is all they need to make the difference. Well, let's take a look at something here. So this is their most recent 990. It's what every nonprofit has to form. It's public facing, their 990. And this is for the T.J. Sampson Community Hospital. This was their filing on 07/26/2024. So they run a fiscal year that's halfway through the year. So they filed this year, just a few months ago. Let's take a look at their financial position, shall we? So prior year, they made total revenue $211 million. Current year, $236 million. So they went up by about $25 million. But maybe, expenses have gone up too as well. Maybe they're really not putting it together. Maybe they don't have the money to operate. Well, when we take a look at their expenses on the year, what we see is total expenses of $209 million in the prior year, leaving them with $1.7 million to the positive. But in the current year that they just filed, their expenses went up only $18 million, despite them making $25 million more, up to $230 million. So it went up $21 million, but they went up in profit $25 million. So it ended up leaving them with basically $6.5 million. On top of that, their total asset values, they had $209 million in assets the prior year. This end of year, this most recent filing, asset value went up. Total liabilities was $51,495,000 for their filing before this one. This one, $49 million. So it actually went down $2 million in liabilities. net assets and fund balances. So this is how much they have total in their funds when we look at their total assets minus their liabilities. That 157 million in prior year, current year 172 million dollars. So we're talking about a nonprofit. So keep in mind, they shouldn't make a profit. That over the last 2 years has made about $8.4 million. That over the last 2 years has seen their net assets go up by $20 million. Has seen their net revenues go up, their bottom line go up, their quote unquote profits, though they're nonprofit, so revenue less expenses go up. Basically, we see a company that's in a pretty good financial position. Definitely a company that, if in order to expand and continue to grow revenue and make more offerings, certainly has the money to go ahead and spend their own $2 million on a third floor pavilion. But apparently, according to our legislators, according to our contract review committee, and according to our Bashir administration, that the TJ Sampson Community Hospital needs that $2 million. They need it more than you do. You know, you who are struggling to put food on your table. You who have felt the crunch of inflation. Now, speaking of waste of money, places where they spend. This last budget cycle, we saw them set aside right about $10 million for Lexington to take over the Transy Fields area, like a Transy College, had some land, some fields, and other things. And to take that over and go ahead and build affordable housing. Well, the statutory committee called, I'm not kidding you, Committee on Race and Access to Equal Opportunities. That's why it's so funny when you hear these legislators say they want to beat DEI. They want to beat the DEI far left liberal CRT type groups. They want to beat them back. They want to destroy them. They start talking about defunding DEI in the colleges and universities. We saw that in a bill flowing through that really didn't do much until the House got a hold of it and Jennifer Decker put some more into it. And then at that point, the Senate refused to call it forward because it did too much. You see, they talk a big game, but you know it's false. You know it's falling on deaf ears because they literally have a DEI committee. They have a CRT committee. They have a committee that is there to ensure that, you know, institutional racism is addressed, which is the very crux of belief. See, DEI and CRT, they believe that our institutions are inherently racist. Not people, but our institutions, and therefore people of not white and straight skin color and then sexuality and male, so mainly white straight male, people who aren't white straight males are given access to better opportunities than everybody else. And so this commission was created to deal with that. Now, of course, this commission was cooked up at a time during the Black Lives Matter movement when Republicans were still thinking maybe we'll jump on this whole anti-racism movement and try to make it our own because, you know, they don't have a spine and they want anything to get an electoral victory that doesn't involve, you know, actually convincing people to your viewpoints. The thing that, you know, Republicans should be doing. But regardless, so this DEI committee, the Committee for Access, Race and Access to Equal Opportunity, they had in the Commerce Lexington to talk about their affordable housing plan that the state gave $10 million to and to talk about the issues. Now, what's funny is keep in mind, they're talking about what they need as Chamber of Commerce in order to build affordable housing in Lexington. And they quote, according to their own slide here from the meeting, Lexington's challenges, lack of land available. That is the first thing, lack of land available. And I want you to keep that in mind. Bring that up because when we get to what they suggest, the fixes are for lack of land available after we get past the barriers to homeownership for communities of color because, you know, everybody isn't struggling with homeownership, white, black, Hispanic, it doesn't matter. Everybody's struggling for legal homeownership because housing is non-existent and loans are through the roof. But anyways, this is what they said. This is their state policy recommendations. You ready? Create new Kentucky low-income housing tax credit to increase access capital for developers increase investment in the Kentucky Affordable Housing Trust Fund, expand access to state housing funds for workforce housing projects, consider state tax credit to support contributions to affordable housing organizations. Basically, give them more money. That's their recommendations. But their first problem that they themselves brought up was the lack of land available. And I bring that up because Lexington engages in something that many of these counties do. Called PDR, purchasing of property development rights. Right now, the city of Lexington owns around 50,000 acres worth of property development rights they will not sell because they want to make sure that Lexington keeps a rolling hills feel to it. Their first problem is a lack of land available, but their response is just give us more money. The response isn't cut government regulation, cut government red tape, cut government buying up land we need to build on in order to make land more available. Their first problem, land. Their response, just give us more money. Don't worry about, government actually doing what government could do for free without having to shell out millions more. But of course, nobody's pockets is getting lined on that one. Well, y'all, that's what we got time for today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. We'll be back here tomorrow. We'll be back at it. We're back from vacation. So we'll see you tomorrow. Hope you have a great rest of your day.